welcome back. Sorry it's been a long time since I've been working on this bike, but got some pretty exciting stuff to show you now. I've just received a new shock for it. This is from a 2008 Yamaha R6. This is the standard shock here, so as you can see with this shock we've got an external bladder, high and low speed compression dampening adjustment, rebound adjustment. Just generally a far better shock than this original one. This is just like a pogo stick really. No adjustment, really primitive dampening setup in it. I can't even like open it up to revalve it if I wanted to, so good to get rid of that, get that out of there. I chose the R6 shock because they're actually not much bigger than the standard one. So the measurements from the standard one eye to eye is around 260 mil, I think. Let's have a look. Very rough measurement there, but around 260 eye to eye, where the R6 is about 290. So it's only 30 millimeters taller, so that's not going to be difficult to overcome. And even the diameter of it, it's not a lot bigger diameter, but yeah, far better shock. Another reason is the clevis on the bottom here has a 30 millimeter opening, where you can see the original one runs an eyelet. So this is going to be better because on this KTM swing arm, it's designed to have a clevis type bottom press over it. So as you can see, I've just got another spare shock that I had there sitting in it. I think that's from a Yamaha R6. I don't know, it's another little commuter bike, it's another rubbish shock, but I've just had this sitting in while I've been working on it because it puts it at the ride height that I want. So what I need to do now is just brace up this swing arm to the frame so I can take this shock out and know that it's going to, ride height's going to be where I want it, and then we can look at mounting this to the swing arm first, and then I'm going to need to make a new upper mount. So I'll get this braced up and that shock out, and come back in a few minutes when I've got the R6 shock sitting in there. Okay, so we've got it braced up. I've got the temporary shock removed from it. These steel rods here just sitting into the swing arm just to basically hold it where I need it to be for the ride height. And I've gone to fit the shock and run into the first problem. It's probably going to be the first of a few, to be honest, but it's what you get when you try and combine a whole bunch of parts from different bikes into one. So basically the width of this clevis at the bottom is exactly 30 millimeters. And then the width here on the swing arm is also exactly 30 millimeters. So it does slide down over it, but the issue is, let's get this back off, is when you've got these bushings pressed into the swing arm there, it actually takes the width out to about 32, 33 millimeters. So the shock won't fit once it's got the bushings in. So to fix that, I've got a couple of options. The first one would be to machine out this section in here a little bit on each side, just a millimeter off each side. That'll work, but I think it would be a bit difficult to get it exactly square and looking right. So the other option, which I'm going to do, is just to shave a little bit off the swing arm mount here. There's a lot more material on that to do, and it's going to be easier for me to keep it flat. So I'm going to do that first because I can't really do anything else until I've got this bottom mount sorted, because the shock has to be square before I can start working on the top mount. So I'm going to get this done and then come back and we'll look at what we need to do to get it mounted up the top. There we have it. I've modified the bottom mount to fit the shock clevis. So taken roughly 1.5 millimeters off each side of that, and then I've also machined the same amount off this bushing here on either side. No seals in there at the moment, so it's a bit loose. I need to order some new seals for that. So yeah, it wasn't that bad of a job. Would have been nice to have been able to do it in a mill, but I don't have a milling machine, so I had to use an air sander and files. Achieved the same result, just took a lot longer. But anyway, it's still probably only an hour's worth of work in that, so it's not that bad. And the shock now slides straight on. I'll just put a bolt through here. One hand is a bit difficult, but there we go. Oh, hang on, shock's in upside down. There we go. So that's nice and free now. It's centered up on that mount. And now we've got to see what we've got to do to modify the top of the frame here. So first thing it's hitting on here, this bracket here, which is part of the original fuel tank mount. So that's got to go. And then around here it looks like I'm also going to have to take a bit of the frame out there, just so I can get this to slot down in. But the first thing will be to get rid of this bracket, and then we'll see where we are and how close we are to making it fit. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think it's going to be fine. Okay, so we've just done a couple of rough cuts to get rid of that bracket out of the way. You see we've still got a bit of a clearance issue here. So the top of the shock body is now hitting on this part of the frame here. So it probably means I'm going to have to cut a notch out of that section there, just to allow that shock to drop down to that cross member. Yeah, so I might trim that and see how we go there. Okay, so we've just done some really quick rough cuts to get that bracket out of the way to see if we're going to clear. And it's close, but not quite. So the top of the shock body is still hitting on the frame. So that'll mean I'll need to notch that section of the frame out to get that eyelet down near that cross member there where I can run a tab onto it. So I mean, that'll work. It's also going to keep the shock bladder central. That was another reason I chose this shock, actually, because the KTM swing arm has an offset mount. I chose this shock because the bladder is offset to the opposite side. So that means I can mount the shock to the side in the frame, so it lines up straight up and down with the swing arm mount, but it will still look fairly symmetrical, I guess, because the bladder is going to be in the center of the frame, just there. So that was another reason for choosing this shock, also for room, I guess. But anyway, I've just had a bit of a think about how I'm going to do this, and while that option is going to work to notch the frame there, I've come up with another idea. I was just messing around with where I put it, and if I mount the shock underneath the frame like that, it is almost a perfect width for that bladder to fit between the frame there. So it needs a slight bit of clearance, but not much. And I think that if I can get it to sit up in there, that's going to look really clean and tidy. You won't even see the bladder at all, it'll be hidden. It'll just mean that I'll have to make a mount off the front of the frame here, which isn't going to be an issue. I've got plenty of room there. There's heaps of room behind the exhaust and the carby to do that. So I think I'm going to finish cleaning up this mount that I just roughly cut off, and I'll trim away a little bit of the inside of the frame there so we can get this bladder to sit up in the middle of it, and then we'll see what we've got to do for a front mount. But I think that that's going to be the best way forward, and I think it's going to look the best, and I don't think it's going to be any more work than if I mounted it from the rear like the original shock was. So we'll get the rest of these brackets trimmed up and make room for the shock to sit up in there, and then we'll come back and see how we're looking. Alright, so I just started cutting more of those brackets away and grinding it away. But I've just sort of realised that with the amount of weld that is on that cross member and all the different brackets that were attached to it, besides the fact that it's going to take forever, I'm probably not going to be able to get it to come up perfect anyway. So I've decided I've just tacked this bit of scrap RHS on top there, and then I'm going to cut this cross member out completely, and I'll just replace it with a new piece of tube. It's smooth, so it's going to be, in the long run, it's going to be quicker, and it's definitely going to look better because I'm not going to have to grind all the weld down. So we're going to cut this out now, and then see how we look from there. Alright, so we've cut out that cross member. As you can see, there's like so many brackets welded onto this that by the time I ground all those welds down and got it looking smooth, it'd be hours really, and just easy to cut it out and put a fresh piece of tube in, so I'm going to do that. And now you can see with the shock in here, it is so close to fitting between the frame, but there's still probably, I'm going to say, 1 millimeter. That's all it is. So, I mean, I could probably flex this frame apart and get it to fit, but I don't really want to do that. It's going to put extra stress on it, and then it also means the top of it's not going to be square because it's going to sort of angled out, if that makes sense. So it's extra work, but I think I'm going to cut the inside of this frame out on each side and then just replate it in a few mil each side, and in that way I'll have a bit extra room as well. I'll have a few millimeters on either side of the bladder there, and it will still tuck up in there nicely. So I'm going to mark that out now, get that cut out, and then template to make some new pieces to fill it in. But we're looking good. I think it's going to work, and yeah, I'm pretty keen to get it up into the frame there so then I can work out how I'm going to do this front mount. So I'm cutting away at this. I started making a template to make a new plate for this section in here. Got the shock to sit in there just to sort of see what I'm going to need to do, and then if you have a look on this side, to get it up through the front here, it means that section of the frame just there, it's going to have a pretty decent section cut out of it, as well as cutting this out to get the bladder to sit up in there. And pretty much it's going to be a lot of work to make it look good, which, I mean, that doesn't really worry me. I don't mind spending the time doing stuff if it's what I need to do. But then I just got to thinking, like, what is this top section of the frame actually for? And so you've got this section here. This is where the original shock bolt went through, so that's why that hole's there. So that's no longer needed, that's obsolete. This is part of the original cross member, which I'm going to replace with a new piece of tube. So again, that's not needed. I was going to have to cut that off anyway. And then up here we just had where the subframe mounted. And now I'm making a new subframe for this bike out of aluminium that really I can mount from anywhere I want. I'll just make whatever brackets I need to make. So I've sort of realised now that probably the best thing for me to do is just cut this top of the frame off here and then make a completely new section, which means I can mount the shock exactly where I want to put it. And then it's going to save me a heap of time and having to clean up all of this area here. It's probably going to be stronger because I'm just going to be able to do it with one piece of tube or RHS with some tabs off it. And yeah, like I said, it means I'm going to be able to put the shock on whatever angle I want to put it on to make sure that the bike sits exactly how I want it to sit and how the shock's going to work best. So, as the way things go, they're always evolving. I don't like to pre-plan too much, just so that I can adapt as I go and make decisions as I go. So I think we're going to do that. So I'll cut that top section off, get the shock sitting exactly on the angle I want it to sit on, and then make some new mounts from there. So let's see how that works, eh? Alright, we're all cut away. We're nice and level here. I might look like a bit of a hack, but I do measure stuff and make sure I get everything level and square. Quite a lot of the frame ended up being cut away to get the clearance that I needed, but that's okay because it'll be replaced anyway. The shock will fit in here like this, obviously in the center of the frame. And then I have this RHS, which is the same wall thickness as the frame, and very close to the same width as well. I'll just need to cut that and modify it a little bit, but it's not going to need a lot of work. That will get welded onto the top of the frame like that, and then in the center of that I will drill a hole and have this piece of tube run through like a cross member. Then I will also cut a section of this out for the shock to sit in between. Kind of hard to explain, so I'm just gonna start doing it so I can show you what I mean. But basically it's going to mean that the shock is going to sit on the exact angle that I want it to sit on, right in the middle of the frame spars there, which will be the strongest point. And it's going to be a really simple and clean look. So I'm going to start drilling this RHS, get ready to put the tube through, and I can show you what I've got planned. Right, so now that I've got the RHS drilled and the tube sitting through it, you'll probably get a bit more of an idea of what my plan is with this shock mount now. These are going to be welded to the frame. I'm going to need to make a piece that blends it into here to make it look like one piece, but that's not an issue. Same, this RHS will be radiused around the top of the tube here, around 10 millimeters above that, and capped. So that'll look nice and clean. And then in the center of this tube or crossmember here, I'm going to cut a section out the same width as the top eyelet on this shock here, plate that, and then the shock will drop down into the crossmember, and I'll have a bolt run through the center of it. So it's all hidden, looks nice and neat and tidy. The shock will actually form part of the crossmember once it's bolted in. So I think that's the final idea that I've got for this and what I'm going to go ahead with. It's going to be nice and clean, nice and strong, and as simplest as I could make it, the simplest way I could make it, I guess, which is always the aim. Just got to try and make it look good now. So I'm going to carry on. I'll get that crossmember cut so I can get the shock bolted in. And yeah, we'll check back in then. Okay, I'm just in the middle of welding up some of this tube here for the crossmember that the shock's going to mount to. I just want to show you a couple of things that you're not going to see when it's done, how I've done it. So I basically just got some 5mm plate and used the same hole saw as I used to drill through the RHS to drill myself out a centerpiece here. This one's already been drilled out, that one needs to be drilled out bigger yet. And that is exactly the same diameter as the inside of this tube. So that makes it easy to get this fill piece. And then I've just spun the tube in the lathe just to get a bit of a chamfer on the edge. And you can sort of see here, that's just so that the weld has something to sit into, because that is going to be ground flat. And I don't want to grind away all of the weld because it's still going to need some weld there for strength. So you can see there it has chamfered, so it's got like a nice valley to fill with weld. So when it's ground down, there's still going to be plenty of weld on there. And then on this piece, this is going to be on the end that receives the bolt through the shock. I've just welded a nut, an old nut that I found in the spare bolt drawer that I've got. Welded that to the back of it so that when that is in there, from this side, all you're going to need is the one bolt to screw in. You're not going to have to try and get in with an extension and a socket. Alright, we're making some progress. So we've got the shock sitting in there where it's going to sit. As you can see, this top crossmember tube is going to run through this RHS here. Internal bolt. There's a nut welded on the inside of this other tube, so you only need one spanner to get the shock in and out. Shock also forms part of the crossmember when it's bolted in there. So I guess now you can sort of see what I'm trying to achieve. So now I need to go and radius the top of these, make them look a lot nicer, and start looking at how I'm going to blend this RHS into the frame here. Alright, so up to the point now where I'm going to radius the top of this RHS. To do that, I've just got some 50mm pipe, cut it in half, and then cut a 25mm width section, which is the width of this RHS. Lay that on top like that, just till I get a nice even gap. Trace around it with a Sharpie and it's ready to cut. So cut around that line now on both of these and then trim the outside of this pipe here. I'll get this tacked on and this flush, and it should be starting to look like something. And we're in, we're mounted. There's obviously a lot of work still to go. I need to make these fill pieces here to join this in. Bit of work to be done down the bottom of the frame here to make that blend in. But that's not a big deal because I had to do that area anyway for where the old subframe mounted. But the shock is mounted, that slots straight in. Fully welded on the inside there. And then if you come around this side, you see bolt just runs through the center there, so it's all hidden. I'll probably make some plugs for those holes once it's all done. So yeah, it's going to work. The angle of the shock is actually pretty much exactly the same as what the factory shock was at. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but we'll see how it rides, I guess. I can always tweak the valving in the shock and change the spring if I need to. So yeah, so far so good. They're all on and done. They just look a bit out of place at the moment because obviously they're not blended into the frame. They look like they're just tacked on there as an afterthought. So I've got to spend a bit of time now making it look like it came from the factory with that mount. I think it'll look okay when it's done, because obviously you're going to have this hole up here. We'll match this hole in the frame when that's lineaged down and smoothed out. I think it'll look alright.
You want to get high?
Okay, it's been a couple of days, so we're back on it. Just been working on a few different templates for how I'm going to join this shock mount to the existing frame. I spent a couple of hours trying a few different bits and pieces and shapes and different complex shapes, and what I thought was going to look best, or also what was going to be fairly simple to make. After going through a few different designs, I've come to this one, which is the most simple of all three or four that I drew up. Basically, I'm going to cut this out of some 3mm steel plate and weld it to the frame. As simple as that, really. I've run this angle here, and the reason for that is because that actually matches the angle on this cross member here, which also matches the angle of the rocker cover when the engine's in the frame. So if you sort of kind of get an idea there of what it's going to look like. So once I weld the 3mm plate onto this mount, I'll leave a stepped lip there, so it's sort of a defined line on that angle, which hopefully when everything's together should all tie in. So I'll start cutting this out of some 3mm plate now, get the shapes right. I've got to do the same for both sides, get it bent up and tacked in place, and we'll see how it looks. Filler plates are all made up just out of 3mm mild steel, so that is going to go roughly there. I'll show you on the other side. So first what I need to do is cut out this section here. This raised section here was where the original fairing mounted, so I'm not going to need that. And rather than lap over this bit completely, I thought it'd be better just to cut it out, have a whole new piece of metal there. So I've prepared the other side, that's ready to tack in. So you can see I've cut that section out, which isn't needed. The copper is just this weld through primer here. I put it on the back side of any metal that's going to be lapped or I'm not going to be able to get to with paint, just to stop it rusting later on. So this back bit here, that's been cut. I haven't cut that all the way out, but that'll be replaced as well. You'll see as I go along with that. I've had to leave the front section here just so it's got a bit of structure while I weld the new panel in. I don't want it moving around too much, but basically that is just going to be welded in place there like that. So it should add a bit of strength, definitely going to be stronger than what was there from the factory, and it should look like it's pretty factory as well, I think. So I'll carry on and get this tacked in because it's a bit hard to explain exactly what I'm going to do, and I'll just film as I go so you can see the process. But basically we're going to have a new front section here, a new section at the back that's going to blend up into the shock mount, and then on the inside that section there is also going to be replaced. So it'll be in a couple of different pieces welded together and then blended to look seamless. So I'll carry on and I'll film as I go because it's easier than trying to explain it. That's the side plates all welded on. For now anyway. I'm going to run a TIG weld bead across the top there that I can lineage down so it's a nice sharp edge. So that's why I've also drilled this plate so I can plug weld it on, just so it's got a bit of extra strength after I grind that weld down. This bottom weld I've done with a MIG, and that's because there was a bit of a valley there to fill. This is going to be lineage back flush with the frame so it looks like one piece. So I decided to MIG weld that just because it gives me a bigger weld bead, so I can lineage the top of that down and there's still going to be plenty of weld there holding it on nice and strong. On the inside here I've just run a quick little stitch on the inside there as well, just as an extra bit, but there's going to be a whole new panel goes down there that joins to that. Other side exactly the same really, just fat MIG weld along the bottom there that's going to be ground down, and then 5 plugs there. So when I TIG this top line and grind it down, there's still some extra strength there. So we've got to make some pieces now that join from there down to the existing frame on both sides. Same on the back here. We're going to go from the existing frame up to where that diagonal line is there, so it follows on from that angle. And then finally we're going to make the new infill piece in the back here. So I'm going to start off with making these curved front pieces just out of some 20mm by 3mm flat bar. We'll make the rear pieces, get them all tacked in, and then decide what we've got to do for the inner piece. Alright, so I'm just going to stop it here for today. I've done another full day, so I'll carry on with this in another few days. But so today we've got these side plates put on, and then I've made these rear pieces as well. They're just tacked in place, but I did fully weld them here to the shock mount there, so it's this additional triangulated bit here just to fill that gap that was there. So that's all come together pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking so far. Next will be make this section here. I'm going to try and make this in one piece. It goes to the front, down, and back to this angled piece here. Fix up this little bit of the frame there. And yeah, just the front filler pieces still have to be made as well. But yeah, it's coming together pretty well. I think it's going to work alright. So yeah, I'll wrap it up for today and then come back in a couple of days and get some more time and carry on with it. We're back for another session on the shock mounts. It's Friday arvo, just got home from work, so I'm going to try to get a couple of hours in on this before having a full day on it tomorrow. So today's plans, what we're going to do is make these fill pieces here for the fronts. So I'll start making a template for that and mucking around with some flat bar to see if I can get that shape sorted. Try to get those tacked in place, or at least one side done today, and then tomorrow we can come in and make these inside pieces. It's going to be a pretty big job. Anyway, I'll get to filming doing these front pieces. Alright, so we've got one side tacked in. It still needs a bit of work, a bit of shape put into it, but you get the idea of what it's going to look like. So basically it's going to flow down into the frame there. I'll blend that section there, so that's just a nice transition back into the flat frame line there. And then up the top we're going to have an angle here, which is going to run into that angle, which runs into that angle. That's the front pieces just roughed in. They definitely still need some more shaping, but I've just put a couple of tacks on them just to hold them in place for now, just so I can use them as a bit of a guide to start making the inside pieces. But as you can see, they're just going to flow down into the frame. Hopefully shouldn't have too many issues blending them in. So now that I've got these sort of just tacked in place, I'm going to start drawing up some of these inside pieces here. Okay, so the process for these inside pieces, I just start off with a cardboard template. To make that, I just sort of press the cardboard up in there, use my fingers to mark the lines, if that makes sense, and then sort of mark it with a pen, cut that out. Once I've got that shape pretty close in cardboard, I'll come over here, transfer that to some 3mm mild steel plate, and then cut it out. I cut all my steel plates out just with the 1mm cut-off disc on the angle grinder. Come back with the flapper disc to sort of smooth out the curves here. It would obviously be nice to be able to get stuff laser cut, but I don't have those facilities in my home shed. So get by with what I have, which is an angle grinder. That's the inside pieces all made and tacked in place. They're actually pretty difficult to make because they've got, you can't really see on camera, but they bend quite a few different ways. You've sort of got a curve down towards the frame there, and then here you've got another bend back this way down to meet the bottom of the frame there. So they're a bit tricky. They took me longer than I would have liked, but they're in place now, all tacked in. I've just ground the tops off the tacks, ready to weld this in. So I've got to go ahead now and fully weld all of these plates. So I'm just going to MIG weld these because these are going to be sort of ground and rounded off. That's why I've left the valley to fill with weld, so when I grind the welds down, it's still going to be plenty of weld in there for strength basically. So I'm not grinding all the weld away, I'm literally just going to be rounding off the tops of them, and then I'll come back on these top ones here and I'll TIG those because those welds won't be getting ground. When I paint the frame, I'll probably body filler them and sand a sharp line into it, but I'm not going to take any of the weld off. When I had the inside plate off as well, I was able to get some weld on the inside here on the outside plates. So that means even though these welds are going to be lineaged, there's also a full weld on the inside that's going to hold it. So they should be plenty strong enough. Never really know, like I'm going to have to do a lot of testing on this before I actually paint it and see if anything needs more gusseting or more welds, but I think it's going to be okay for the forces that I'm going to be putting through it, which is not a lot. So yeah, so I've got a lot of welding to do now, so I'm just going to work my way through this, just stitching it in, and then we'll start grinding it back, getting some shape into it, and get ready to do the final TIG welding. Alright, so that's all the MIG welds done. You should have seen in the video I was just moving around, stitching them sort of 1 inch at a time, going side to side just to try and keep the heat even to stop it from distorting too much. And so now we're up to the point where I've got to grind these down. Whenever I'm grinding MIG welds, I always start with one of these grinding discs here. It's like a flexible 3mm FOF grinding disc. I find it the best for grinding welds because it's not very aggressive, and as long as you don't put any pressure on the grinder, you can get a nice clean grind with it without digging into any of the other metal around you. It also doesn't get the metal too hot. So yeah, I don't know where you would get these outside of Australia, but in Australia you can get these from sort of welding supply shops and stuff like that. You won't really find them at Bunnings or anywhere like that because it's more of a specialist thing, but it's definitely worth getting. So I'll start with that. I've already got one on the grinder there. Then I'll go to just a flapper just to get it nice and close, but I won't grind this all the way down with the angle grinder. I like to leave a little bit of material there just so I can come in then with the air sander, start with the 36 and knock it down to almost flush, then go to a 50 grit, get it flush, and then finally I'll come over with the DA and hit it with 80 grit on the DA. So it's a bit of a process, but I think it's worth it to get a good end result. I'm also expecting that once I start knocking these back, I'm probably going to need to come back with the MIG and just sort of zap up some of the lows. Might be a couple of pinholes that I've missed that I can't see yet, but that's to be expected. So anyway, it's going to take a while to get this ground down, so I'm going to get started on it and we'll come back when that's done. Just finished with the grinding disc, so this is the first stage. So as you can see, it's pretty ugly at the moment, but that's alright because that's what it looks like at this stage. Most people don't like to show this sort of stage, me included. Normally you won't see photos like this on Instagram, but this is what it looks like before I go to the air sander. So it's roughly about 45 minutes or so of grinding to get to this stage. So as you can see, like I've ground it down, but not quite all the way, just taken the majority of what I needed to get taken off, because I can come in with the air sander and get that perfectly flat now. So first I'm just going to put the flat disc onto the angle grinder now and just get in some of the valleys in here, which are a bit difficult to get with the grinding disc, and then onto the air sander and start getting it looking nice, really, squaring it up. And then finally I'll come through with a file and get all the edges sharp and make it look really nice. We're getting closer. So this side I've finished with the air sander now. I'll just run the linisher wheel or the flapper disc on the edges there. So as you can see, it's pretty close, but it's not quite like square and straight yet. So on the other side here, I was at the same stage, so I've just been working this with by hand with a file. Still got a bit to go, but you can see it's getting better there. So I try and do my edges by hand with a file, just so I can make sure that I get them nice and straight and square. And I think the good thing about using a file is when the light gets on it, you can sort of see your line pretty clearly, where when you're using a grinder, that line can sort of disappear into all the different grinding lines. So it's a bit time consuming and hard work, but it really does pay off in the end for what it looks like. It's a new day, hopefully the last day on these shock mounts. I'm kind of getting sick of them now. So I've just finished filing up the other side. It's pretty good. It's not like a perfect file finish, but as I said before, that doesn't really matter because this frame is going to get painted, and it means it will be in high build primer and get a skim of filler where it needs it. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but I want it really close because I don't like having any more than the bare minimum of body filler and stuff. So now that that's filed up, we've got some nice lines there that are reasonable. Just use your basic half round file and a flat file to get all that done. I can now go ahead and TIG weld these edges on both sides, then hit it with the DA and tidy it up, and it should be done. One more thing I've got to do, which I haven't shown, is this spacer in here is the same width as the top of the shock. Now when I welded this like completely, this top mount pulled in about 1 millimeter, so it means that the shock doesn't slide in. So I've just got to use a scissor jack just to press these out just slightly a bit, just to get it so that the shock will go back in there. Just distortion from welding's pulled that in a little bit, but that's pretty normal. I expected that. So let's go ahead and TIG these up, sand it down, make it look pretty, and hopefully that'll be it. That's it, we're done. Shock mounts are done. There's still a couple of little bits and pieces I'd like to do to it. I think it's probably going to flex a bit, so I'm going to need to put a cross member in here. But I'm going to hold off on that because I'm going to run the exhaust out and around through that side there. So I'm going to run that through before I do the cross member, because that'll determine where exactly I'm going to put that. But otherwise, yeah, we're pretty much done. The shock fits nicely, slots straight in and out. As you can see, like I spoke about earlier, the bladder being offset, it sort of centralizes it in the frame. It's still a little bit to the right, but it definitely looks a bit better than if it was all the way to the side. So happy with that. Obviously the lower mount I haven't had to touch apart from machine the bushings down. The top welds, the TIG welds there, I would love to grind them down and make them look like a nice sharp line, but I don't want to take any strength away from there, so I'll leave them for now, and I'll come back when I paint the frame and hit them with some body filler and sand a sharp line into that instead, so that it can keep its strength. And inside there, I haven't fully welded underneath here yet. I will do that once I've got the frame up on the bench, but there's a lot more stuff I still need to weld on the frame as well. So yeah, there we have it. That's gonna do it for this episode on the shock mounts. Ton of time in them, probably I would guess 30 hours, somewhere like that. Professional shop might be able to do it a bit faster than that, but that's how long it took me. It's just how long it takes to do this sort of stuff. So with that all said and done, I can move on. So the next video is going to be a big one. So you can see here the back wheel is way over to the right in the swing arm, and that's because this sprocket carrier sticks out way too far. So I need to work out how I'm going to move this wheel over. I have no idea how I'm going to do that yet, but that's what next video is going to be, is somehow machining that sprocket carrier to allow the wheel to come over, and then also to make sure the sprocket still lines up with the front sprocket on the motor. So that's going to be a bit of work working that out. Also, I've got to suss out what I'm going to do with this brake caliper, because you can see here the post mount on the swing arm is already just about touching on the disc there. So a lot of work to do with that. I might do another shorter video in the meantime, just finishing up some more little jobs on the frame. But yeah, next big job, getting this wheel to fit. So thanks for watching again. Hope you enjoyed it. If this one was too long, please let me know and I'll go back to doing the shorter episodes, but I really wanted to get this done from start to finish on film so I could show the entire process. So, alright, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you in the next one.